In the mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through every shadow and trust is a luxury few can afford, Captain Sarah Mitchell learned that sometimes the greatest enemy isn't the one firing bullets at you. It's the one standing right beside you. What began as a routine mission to extract a missing general would become a deadly game of survival, betrayal, and justice that would test everything she believed about loyalty, duty, and the thin line between hero and villain. By the time the sun rose over the blood-soaked valley, Sarah would discover that some wounds cut deeper than shrapnel, and some battles are won not with weapons, but with the relentless pursuit of truth. Captain Sarah Mitchell pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the abandoned compound, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid mountain air. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant howl of wind through the rocky peaks of the Hindu Kush. Her team of 6 elite soldiers crouched beside her, their faces painted with determination and the kind of focused intensity that comes from years of operating in the world's most dangerous places. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. General Marcus Thompson, a decorated 3-star general with over 30 years of service, had disappeared during a classified reconnaissance mission near the Pakistan border 3 days ago. His convoy had been hit by an improvised explosive device, but when the rescue teams arrived, they found burned vehicles and dead soldiers, but no trace of the general. Intelligence suggested he might have been taken by a local warlord named Hakim Nazir, who controlled this particular stretch of mountainous terrain with an iron fist and a network of caves that had sheltered fighters for decades. Sarah had volunteered for the extraction mission without hesitation. She had served under General Thompson during her early years in the Army, and the man had been more than just a commanding officer to her. He had been a mentor, a father figure who had believed in her when others doubted whether a woman could handle the pressures of special operations. When she had faced disciplinary action for insubordination 3 years ago, it was Thompson who had gone to bat for her, arguing that her questioning of a questionable order showed exactly the kind of moral courage the Army needed. The compound below them was a maze of interconnected buildings carved into the mountainside, with narrow passages and hidden chambers that made it a perfect fortress for someone who didn't want to be found. Sarah's thermal imaging equipment showed at least 15 heat signatures moving through the complex, but there was no way to determine which, if any, belonged to the general. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, her second-in-command and closest friend in the unit, moved up beside her. His face was grim, and she could see the concern in his dark eyes. "Something doesn't feel right about this, Cap," he whispered, his voice barely audible even though they were alone on the rocky ledge. "Intel was too clean, too easy. Since when do these warlords just sit still and wait for us to show up?" Sarah had been thinking the same thing. In her 8 years of special operations, she had learned to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that they were walking into something bigger than a simple rescue mission. The compound was too well guarded for a man who supposedly operated with just a handful of fighters. The positioning of the sentries was too professional, too organized. This wasn't the work of a mountain bandit. This was military precision. But the mission parameters were clear, and General Thompson was running out of time. Every hour that passed reduced the chances of finding him alive, and Sarah had seen too many good soldiers die because someone hesitated when action was needed. She checked her weapon one final time, made sure her communications equipment was functioning, and gave a hand signal that would set the rescue operation in motion. The team moved like shadows down the mountainside, using the natural rock formations and sparse vegetation to mask their approach. Sarah had drilled with these men countless times, and their coordination was flawless. Private Jackson took point, his sniper rifle providing overwatch from a concealed position. Corporal Martinez and Private Lee flanked left, while Sergeant Rodriguez and Private Thompson moved right. Sarah would take the center approach, the most dangerous route, but also the one most likely to lead directly to where prisoners might be held. The first sign that something was wrong came when they encountered no resistance at the perimeter. The guards that thermal imaging had shown were nowhere to be found, and the outer defensive positions appear to have been abandoned in haste. Sarah's radio crackled softly with updates from her team members, all reporting the same thing. Empty positions, no enemy contact, and an eerie quiet that felt more like a trap than good fortune. As they penetrated deeper into the compound, Sarah began to notice details that made her blood run cold. The fortifications were not just well built. They incorporated modern military engineering techniques that suggested outside assistance. The communications equipment she glimpsed through windows was far too sophisticated for a local warlord's operation. Most disturbing of all, some of the guards they did encounter were carrying weapons and wearing gear that looked suspiciously like American military issue. The central building of the compound was a two-story structure that appeared to serve as both living quarters and command center. Sarah's team converged on it from three directions, moving with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had executed similar operations dozens of times before. But as they prepared to breach the main entrance, Sarah heard something that made her freeze in place. The sound of English being spoken in what sounded like an American accent. She motioned for her team to hold position while she crept closer to a window on the ground floor. What she saw through the grimy glass made her question everything she thought she knew about the mission. General Thompson was indeed inside the building, but he wasn't bound or guarded like a prisoner. Instead, he was sitting at a table with three men in military fatigues, studying what appeared to be maps and documents. The conversation was too muffled to make out clearly, but the body language was all wrong for a hostage situation. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. Had the general escaped his captors and somehow taken control of the situation? Was this some kind of undercover operation that her team hadn't been briefed on? Or was something much more sinister taking place in this remote mountain stronghold? Before she could process what she had seen, the decision was made for her. A door on the far side of the building opened, and Hakim Nazir himself emerged, flanked by two armed men. Sarah recognized him from intelligence photos. A tall, bearded man in his 50s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. But what shocked her was that he appeared to be engaged in casual conversation with another figure who followed him out of the building. It was General Thompson, and he was not acting like a man who had been held captive for 3 days. Sarah's radio earpiece crackled with Rodriguez's voice. "Cap, we've got movement on the south side. Looks like they're preparing to move out. If we're going to take them, it has to be now." The next few seconds would define everything that followed. Sarah had to make a choice between following her orders to extract the general and confronting the growing evidence that this mission was not what it appeared to be. Her military training told her to complete the objective, but her instincts warned her that she was about to step into something that would change her life forever. She keyed her radio and whispered the words that would seal her fate. "Hold position. Something's not right here. I'm going in for a closer look." What Sarah saw in the next few minutes would shatter her understanding of loyalty, duty, and the true cost of the war she had dedicated her life to fighting. Through the window, she watched as General Thompson spread out what appeared to be detailed maps of American military positions, pointing to specific locations and discussing them with Nazir and his associates. The conversation was animated, collaborative, and utterly treasonous. The general she had respected, admired, and trusted was selling out American soldiers to enemy forces. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Every mission that had gone wrong in the past 6 months, every ambush that had caught her fellow soldiers by surprise, every intelligence leak that had cost American lives, it all suddenly made horrifying sense. General Thompson had not been captured. He had arranged his own disappearance to facilitate a meeting with enemy forces, using his position and access to classified information to orchestrate attacks against his own troops. Sarah's hands trembled as she raised her weapon, but before she could decide what to do next, she heard the distinctive sound of footsteps approaching her position from behind. She spun around to find herself face to face with two armed men who had somehow flanked her without triggering any alarms from her team. The trap had been sprung, but not in the way she had expected. One of the men was holding a device that looked like a remote detonator, and his smile was cold and predatory. "Captain Mitchell," he said in accented English, "you and your team were not supposed to see this." The explosion that followed was not the improvised device of desperate insurgents, but a carefully coordinated demolition designed to eliminate witnesses to a betrayal that reached the highest levels of the American military command structure. As Sarah felt herself thrown through the air by the concussive force of the blast, her last conscious thought was a promise to herself. If she survived this, she would make sure the world knew the truth about General Marcus Thompson. The mountain compound erupted in a series of coordinated explosions that lit up the night sky and sent shock waves through the valleys below. When the smoke cleared and the fires died down, the complex was a smoking ruin filled with twisted metal, collapsed stone, and the bodies of soldiers who had died not in service to their country, but as victims of its betrayal. But Sarah Mitchell was not among the dead, though anyone who found her broken body in the rubble might have wished she was. Sarah's eyes opened to a world of pain and darkness. Every breath sent sharp daggers through her ribs, and the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. She was buried under a pile of concrete and twisted metal that had once been part of the compound's outer wall. Her left arm was pinned beneath a heavy beam, and she could feel warm liquid trickling down her forehead. Whether blood or something worse, she didn't want to know. The silence was complete except for the occasional groan of settling debris and the distant sound of vehicles moving away from the compound. She tried to call out for her team members, but only a hoarse whisper emerged from her throat. Rodriguez, Martinez, Lee, Jackson, Thompson, where were they? The growing pool of blood beneath a nearby pile of rubble suggested she might be the only one who had survived the blast. It took her nearly an hour to work herself free from the debris, using her combat knife to chip away at the concrete, and her remaining strength to shift the metal beam that had trapped her arm. When she finally emerged from what had nearly become her grave, the compound was a moonlit wasteland of destruction. The systematic nature of the demolition was evident. This had not been the desperate act of cornered fighters, but a carefully planned operation designed to eliminate evidence and witnesses. Her equipment had been scattered and damaged by the explosion, but Sarah managed to salvage her sidearm, a partially functional radio, and a small emergency medical kit. Her night vision goggles had been destroyed, forcing her to rely on the pale moonlight filtering through the mountain peaks. As she searched through the rubble for survivors, she found the bodies of her team members one by one. Rodriguez had been killed instantly when a wall collapsed on his position. Martinez and Lee had been caught in a secondary explosion that had turned their cover into a deadly trap. Jackson and Thompson were simply gone, vaporized by the force of the blast that had been positioned directly beneath their overwatch position. 6 good soldiers were dead, and Sarah was certain it had not been an accident. She stumbled through the ruins, fighting off waves of nausea and dizziness for what was almost certainly a concussion, searching for any evidence of what she had witnessed before the explosion. The building where she had seen General Thompson collaborating with enemy forces was now nothing but a crater filled with twisted metal and smoking debris. The maps, documents, and equipment that might have provided proof of the general's treachery had been systematically destroyed. But Sarah had not survived 8 years of special operations by giving up when the odds were against her. She began to search more methodically, looking for anything that might have survived the destruction. In what had once been a storage room, she found a partially burned hard drive that had been protected by a metal filing cabinet. In another area, she discovered fragments of documents that had been blown clear of the main blast zone. Most important of all, she found a satellite phone that had been dropped and forgotten in the chaos of evacuation. The phone's memory contained a list of recent calls, and Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized several of the numbers. 2 were direct lines to Pentagon offices. 1 was the number for a secure communication facility she knew was used for classified operations, and another was a number she recognized as belonging to the office of a senator who sat on the Armed Services Committee. General Thompson had not just been passing information to enemy forces. He had been coordinating his activities with people at the highest levels of the American government and military. Sarah's radio finally crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The voice was that of Colonel James Hartford, her unit's commanding officer back at base. Viper 1, this is Control. Report your status immediately. Sarah hesitated before responding. If General Thompson had been operating a network of traitors that reached into the Pentagon, how could she know who to trust? Her unit's mission had been authorized at the highest levels, which meant someone in the chain of command had known they were sending her team into a death trap. Control, this is Viper 1, she finally replied, disguising her voice as much as possible. Multiple casualties, mission failed. Compound was destroyed before we could secure the objective. Copy that, Viper 1. What is your current status and location? We're sending extraction immediately. The offer of immediate extraction set off every alarm bell in Sarah's head. In 8 years of operations, she had never seen the military move with that kind of speed unless they had assets already in position. The normal protocol would be for her to make her way to a predetermined rally point and wait for scheduled extraction, not for rescue teams to be dispatched at a moment's notice to her exact location. Negative on extraction, Control. I am mobile and proceeding to Rally Point Charlie as per standard protocol. We'll contact you from there in 24 hours. The radio went silent for several seconds before Hartford's voice returned, and Sarah could hear the tension in his tone. Viper 1, that is not advisable. The area is hot with enemy activity. We strongly recommend immediate extraction from your current position. Sarah turned off the radio without responding. If they wanted to find her, they would have to work for it. She spent the next hour moving through the compound, gathering intelligence, and trying to piece together what she had stumbled into. The more she searched, the clearer it became that this had been a major operation involving significant resources and coordination. The explosive devices used to destroy the compound were military-grade, the kind of sophisticated demolition charges that were not available to local warlords. The timing and coordination of the blast suggested professional military engineers, not insurgent bomb makers. But the most damning evidence was what she found in a partially collapsed communications room. Hidden beneath fallen ceiling tiles, she discovered a military-issue laptop computer that had been left behind in the hasty evacuation. The device was damaged but functional, and when Sarah managed to power it up, she found files that made her hands shake with rage. The laptop contained detailed records of arms sales to insurgent groups, intelligence reports that had been altered before being passed up the chain of command, and, most shocking of all, a list of planned operations that included deliberate targeting of American patrols by enemy forces who were actually being directed by American military personnel. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Weapons dealers, military contractors, intelligence officers, and high-ranking military commanders were all working together to prolong the conflict for profit, while American soldiers died in carefully orchestrated ambushes. General Thompson was not just a traitor. He was the operational commander of a network that was actively sabotaging the American war effort for financial gain. Sarah copied the files onto a portable drive she found in the laptop case, then used thermite grenades from her kit to destroy the computer itself. If she was going to expose this conspiracy, she needed to survive long enough to get the evidence to someone she could trust, and that meant staying ahead of the people who had already proven they were willing to kill American soldiers to protect their secret. She gathered her equipment and began to make her way down the mountainside, using the terrain and her training to stay hidden from the search parties that she knew would soon be looking for her. The nearest American base was 40 kilometers away, but Sarah had no intention of going there. If the conspiracy reached as high as she suspected, walking into an American facility could be signing her own death warrant. Instead, she set course for a small village she remembered from previous operations, a place where she had once helped provide medical assistance to local civilians. The village elder, a man named Hassan, had expressed gratitude for her help and offered assistance if she ever needed it. It was a thin thread to hang her life on, but it was better than trusting the chain of command that had already betrayed her once. The journey down the mountain took her through some of the most treacherous terrain in Afghanistan, rocky slopes and narrow paths that could kill an unwary traveler even without the added danger of enemy forces. Sarah's injuries slowed her progress, but her determination kept her moving. Every step was a struggle against pain, exhaustion, and the growing certainty that powerful people wanted her dead. As dawn approached, she reached a ridge that overlooked the valley where Hassan's village was located. What she saw there made her realize that her situation was even more desperate than she had imagined. The village was surrounded by military vehicles, and she could see soldiers conducting what appeared to be a systematic search of every building. Even from a distance, she could tell that these were not regular army units. The equipment and tactics were those of special operations forces, the kind of elite troops that were used for the most sensitive and dangerous missions. They were not there to rescue her. They were there to eliminate her. Sarah found a concealed position among the rocks and settled in to observe the operation below. Through her binoculars, she could see that the soldiers were being thorough in their search, checking every hiding place and questioning every villager. She recognized the unit commander, Major David Chun, from his service record photos. Chun was known for his efficiency and his complete loyalty to his superiors, exactly the kind of officer who would carry out orders without asking uncomfortable questions. As she watched, Sarah saw Hassan being led away from his house in handcuffs. The old man's face was bloodied, and it was clear that he had been beaten during interrogation. The sight filled Sarah with rage and guilt. By seeking help from Hassan, she had brought danger to an innocent man who had shown her nothing but kindness. But Hassan's capture also told her something important. The conspiracy had resources and reach that extended far beyond what she had imagined. They had identified a potential contact from her service record, tracked down his location, and deployed a special operations team to capture him within hours of her team's destruction. This was not the work of a few corrupt officers. This was a sophisticated network with access to classified personnel files, rapid deployment capabilities, and the kind of high-level authorization needed to conduct military operations on foreign soil. Sarah was no longer just hunting a traitor. She was fighting a shadow war against an enemy that had infiltrated her own military to the highest levels. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, she made a decision that would define the rest of her mission. Instead of running or hiding, she would go on the offensive. General Thompson and his conspirators thought they had eliminated the only witness to their crimes, but they were wrong. Sarah Mitchell was alive. She had evidence of their treachery, and she was going to make them pay for every American soldier who had died because of their greed. The hunt was about to begin. Sarah spent the day hidden in a cave system that honeyed the mountainside, using the time to plan her next move and tend to her injuries as best she could with limited supplies. The portable drive containing evidence of the conspiracy was secured in a waterproof case and hidden in a crevice where she could retrieve it if needed, but her primary focus was now on tracking down General Thompson before he could disappear completely. Using the satellite phone she had recovered from the compound, Sarah began to monitor communications traffic in the area. Her years of intelligence training had taught her how to intercept and decode military communications, and it didn't take long to identify the frequency being used by the search teams looking for her. What she heard confirmed her worst fears about the scope of the operation against her. Control, this is Hunter 1. Village search complete. No sign of the target. Locals claim no contact with American forces in the past week. Copy, Hunter 1. Expand search pattern to include the eastern ridge line. Target is wounded and on foot, so movement will be limited. Also be advised that there has been a change in mission parameters. Target is now considered extremely dangerous and is authorized for immediate termination upon contact. Sarah's jaw clenched as she listened to her own military discussing her assassination as casually as they might talk about the weather. The fact that they had upgraded her status to shoot on sight told her that someone very powerful was extremely worried about what she might know or who she might tell. Over the next several hours, she continued to monitor communications and began to piece together a picture of the larger operation. General Thompson had not simply disappeared. He had been extracted by a team of private military contractors who were now moving him through a series of safe houses toward an exfiltration point near the Pakistan border. The operation was being coordinated by someone with access to real-time intelligence and military resources, someone who could redirect search and rescue assets without raising questions from lower-level personnel. The communications traffic also revealed something else. Hassan, the village elder who had been captured, was being held at a temporary detention facility that had been established at an abandoned Soviet-era compound about 15 kilometers south of her current position. The facility was being used as a forward operating base for the teams searching for her, and, according to the radio chatter, they were planning to transfer him to a more permanent location within the next 12 hours. Sarah knew she couldn't save Hassan from where she was, but the intelligence about General Thompson's movement gave her an opportunity. The communications indicated that the general would be passing through a checkpoint at dawn, traveling in a convoy of 3 vehicles with minimal security. The checkpoint was located at a narrow mountain pass that offered excellent concealment and multiple escape routes, perfect for an ambush by a single operator with the element of surprise. But first, she needed better equipment. Her sidearm and the few supplies she had salvaged from the compound would not be enough to take on a protected convoy and the inevitable response force that would follow. She needed weapons, communications gear, and transportation if she was going to have any chance of success. The answer came from an unexpected source. During her monitoring of military communications, Sarah intercepted a conversation about a weapons cache that had been discovered and was scheduled for destruction the following morning. The cache was located in a cave system about 8 kilometers from her current position, and, according to the intelligence reports, it contained a significant quantity of small arms, explosives, and other military equipment that insurgents had been stockpiling for future operations. Sarah set out for the weapons cache as soon as darkness fell, moving carefully through terrain she now knew was crawling with soldiers hunting for her. The journey took her through some of the most dangerous ground in Afghanistan, areas where a single misstep could trigger a landslide or where enemy snipers might be positioned to watch the approaches to strategic locations. When she finally reached the cave system where the weapons were hidden, Sarah found herself looking at an insurgent armory that would have been impressive by any military standard. Crates of assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, explosives, and ammunition were stacked throughout the underground complex, along with communications equipment, night vision devices, and other gear that had clearly been captured from or sold by American forces. Sarah selected the equipment she needed carefully, choosing weapons and gear that would give her the best chance of completing her mission while remaining mobile enough to escape afterward. She took an M4 carbine with a grenade launcher, several fragmentation grenades, a sniper rifle with a high-powered scope, and enough ammunition for an extended firefight. She also found a military radio that would allow her to monitor enemy communications and a set of night vision goggles to replace the one she had lost in the compound explosion. With her new equipment secured, Sarah made her way toward the mountain pass, where General Thompson's convoy was scheduled to appear at dawn. The route took her through some of the most rugged terrain in the region, but it also offered multiple positions where a single sniper could effectively engage a convoy while having escape routes available if the situation went wrong. She reached the pass with 2 hours to spare before dawn and immediately began to survey the tactical situation. The road through the pass was narrow and winding, with steep slopes on both sides that would force any convoy to slow down significantly. There were several large boulders and rock formations that would provide excellent concealment for a sniper, and the acoustics of the pass would make it difficult for enemy forces to determine the exact location of incoming fire. Sarah selected a position on the eastern slope of the pass, about 300 meters from the road, where she would have clear sight lines for nearly a kilometer in both directions. The position offered good concealment behind a cluster of large rocks, and there were multiple escape routes that would allow her to disappear into the mountain terrain if pursuit became too intense. As she settled into her firing position and began to adjust her rifle scope for the expected range, Sarah found herself thinking about the men who had died in the compound explosion. Rodriguez had saved her life more than once during their years of service together, and he had died believing he was serving his country with honor. Martinez had talked constantly about his young daughter back home, and Lee had been planning to propose to his girlfriend when he returned from deployment. Jackson had been the best natural soldier Sarah had ever served with, and Thompson had been a kid from rural Montana who had joined the Army because he wanted to make a difference in the world. They had all died because General Thompson and his conspirators had decided that profit was more important than the lives of American soldiers. The first hint of dawn was beginning to appear over the eastern peaks when Sarah heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching from the south. Through her rifle scope, she could see the lead vehicle of the convoy, a heavily armored SUV that was followed by two similar vehicles maintaining tactical spacing. The convoy was moving at the cautious speed of professionals who knew they were traveling through dangerous territory. But they clearly did not expect to encounter resistance at this particular location. Sarah controlled her breathing and settled her crosshairs on the windshield of the lead vehicle. At this range, with the equipment she was using, it would be a relatively easy shot for someone with her training and experience. But as the convoy drew closer, she could see that the vehicle's windows were heavily tinted, making it impossible to identify which one contained General Thompson. She would have to stop the convoy and identify her target before she could complete her mission. Sarah shifted her aim to the front tire of the lead vehicle and squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber round tore through the tire and continued into the engine block, sending the SUV careening off the road and into a cluster of rocks. The second vehicle immediately stopped, and armed men began to deploy from all three vehicles, taking cover behind the armored doors and scanning the mountainside for threats. Through her scope, Sarah watched as a familiar figure emerged from the middle vehicle. General Thompson looked older and more haggard than she remembered, but there was no mistaking the man who had once been her mentor and whom she now knew to be a traitor to everything they had both sworn to defend. The general was shouting orders to his security team, pointing toward the mountainside where Sarah was concealed. Even from a distance, she could see the fear in his movements, the desperate urgency of a man who knew his crimes were finally catching up with him. The security team began to move up the slope toward her position, but they were moving too slowly and too predictably for professionals who should have been prepared for this kind of situation. Sarah waited until the lead element of the security team was within effective range of her position, then opened fire with short, precise bursts that dropped two men immediately and sent the others scrambling for cover. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mountain pass like thunder, and she could hear the security team's radio communications as they tried to coordinate a response to an attack they had not expected. But Sarah was not interested in a protracted firefight with the security team. Her target was General Thompson, and she could see him through her scope, crouched behind the middle vehicle and speaking urgently into his satellite phone. He was calling for backup, for extraction, for anything that might save him from the justice that was finally catching up with him. Sarah adjusted her aim, compensating for wind and distance, and placed her crosshairs on the general's center mass. At this range, with this weapon, it would be an easy shot that would end the threat he posed to American soldiers forever. Her finger tightened on the trigger as she prepared to deliver the justice that military courts and congressional investigations would never provide. But as she was about to fire, something made her hesitate. Through her scope, she could see that General Thompson was not just talking on the phone. He was arguing with whoever was on the other end of the conversation. His body language suggested desperation, even panic, and Sarah realized that he might not be the mastermind of the conspiracy she had uncovered. He might be just another expendable asset in a larger network of corruption and betrayal. If she killed him now, she might never learn the full extent of the conspiracy or identify all the people responsible for her team's death. Sarah lowered her rifle and began to work her way down the mountainside toward the convoy. She moved carefully, using the terrain and the confusion of the firefight to mask her approach. The security team was still focused on the position where she had been firing from, giving her the opportunity to circle around behind them and approach the vehicles from an unexpected direction. When she was within 50 meters of the convoy, Sarah called out in a voice that carried clearly through the mountain air. "General Thompson, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell. I know what you've done, and I have proof of your crimes. Surrender now, and I guarantee you'll live long enough to testify against your co-conspirators." The gunfire stopped immediately, and an eerie silence settled over the mountain pass. Sarah could see the security team looking toward General Thompson for orders, but the man himself seemed frozen with shock and fear. Finally, his voice echoed off the canyon walls, and Sarah could hear the desperation in every word. "Captain Mitchell, you don't understand the situation. These people will kill both of us if they think their operation has been compromised. We need to work together if we want to survive this." "The only thing I need to understand," Sarah replied, "is how many American soldiers died because of your greed. Now step away from the vehicle with your hands visible, or I start shooting again." What happened next would be debated in classified government files for years to come. General Thompson slowly stepped away from the vehicle with his hands raised, but as he did so, one of the security team members raised his weapon and fired a single shot that dropped the general to the ground. The shooter immediately turned his weapon towards Sarah's position, but she was already moving, using her superior training and knowledge of the terrain to stay ahead of the bullets that followed her retreat into the rocks. The message was clear. General Thompson had become a liability, and his own conspirators had eliminated him to protect their larger operation. But Sarah Mitchell was still alive, still armed, and still determined to expose the truth about the network of corruption that had cost so many American lives. As she disappeared into the mountain wilderness, she carried with her evidence that would eventually bring down senators, generals, defense contractors, and intelligence officers who had betrayed their oaths for profit. The sun was now fully above the eastern peaks, casting long shadows across the mountain pass, where General Thompson's body lay in the dust. By the time rescue forces arrived at the scene, Sarah had vanished into the vast expanse of the Afghan mountains, beginning a journey that would eventually lead her back to Washington and a confrontation with the most powerful people in the American government. The blast had left her for dead, but by sunrise, she had tracked down the missing general and uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. Now the real battle would begin, bringing the truth to light and ensuring that the soldiers who had died in the mountain compound had not sacrificed their lives in vain. Justice was coming, and it wore the face of a woman who had survived betrayal, explosion, and assassination attempts to deliver it personally to those who thought they were beyond the reach of consequences. The hunt was over, but the war for truth was just beginning.